They mistook our laws for suggestions. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the bridge of the Aegis, her knuckles white against the cool metal of the command rail. Before them, suspended in the velvet black, hung the planet Viridia, a swirl of green and blue, a fledgling colony of 2 million souls. A predator circled this cradle. The Cathar Dominion fleet, sleek and obsidian, held its position with an unnerving stillness. They weren't here for war. They were here to collect. Rostova watched the Cathar ships broadcast their legal writ, a shimmering cascade of light and data that washed over Viridia's comms network. It was a demand cloaked in the language of reciprocity for a gratitude tithe. This was their method, a poison served with a silver spoon, and Rostova was here to force a public inquiry that would expose the rot at its core. The air on the bridge hummed with controlled tension. Her first officer, Lieutenant Commander Jax, stood at her side, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. "Their writ is ornate," he said, his voice a low rumble, full of clauses citing developmental aid and uplift reciprocity. "It reads like a gift receipt." Rostova nodded, the muscle in her jaw tight. That was the genius of their cruelty. It was all couched in the language of benevolence, a legal framework so intricate it choked dissent before it could draw breath. They made their victims thank them for the collar. A civilization that weaponized gratitude was a new kind of monster. Archimedes Rostova said, her voice clear and steady. "Run a full-spectrum analysis of the Cathar broadcast. I want every subclause, every embedded precedent cross-referenced with the Aurora Court's foundational charters. Find the seam." The ship's AI responded instantly, its voice a calm, synthesized baritone that filled the bridge. "Acknowledged, Commander. The calculus is underway. Initial projections suggest their legal framework is 97% compliant with neutral space commerce doctrines." The AI's voice was a soothing balm of pure logic, but it offered no comfort. Compliance was their shield. They operated just inside the law, twisting its intent until it screamed. They knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. A young ensign at the communications hub turned her face pale. "Commander, we're receiving a priority dispatch from the Viridian Planetary Council. They're asking for our withdrawal." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jax stiffened. "Withdrawal, they hailed us for aid." The ensign swallowed hard. The Cathar offered them a grace period on the tithe if they formally rejected our assistance. The writ specifies that any third-party intervention nullifies the benevolence clause, making the entire debt payable immediately. It was a classic Cathar maneuver, turning the plea for help into a trigger for ruin. You could not save a hostage by kicking in the door when the hostage-taker had wired the door to the detonator. This fleet, this saintship, teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Rostova knew this doctrine was the core of their mandate. It was why the Aegis was here. "They are using the law as a weapon," Jax Rostova stated, her voice devoid of heat. "So we will build a better law." "Archimedes, what is the margin of non-compliance?" The AI's synthesized voice returned without pause. 3%, Commander. Primarily in the areas of undeclared energy siphoning during their stabilization assistance, and discrepancies in the valuation of delivered technologies. A tiny crack in their perfect legal armor. It was not much, but it was enough. A small civilian freighter, the Stardust Drifter, coasted near Viridia's orbital path, its running lights blinking like a nervous heartbeat. Inside, a family of 4 huddled around a small viewport. The father, a terraforming engineer named Leo, pointed toward the Cathar ships. "See that, Alara?" he murmured to his daughter. "They say those ships brought us the rains that ended the long drought." The little girl pressed her face to the cold glass, her breath fogging a small circle. Are they our friends? Leo's wife placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression tight with a fear she tried to hide. They are partners, sweetie. We owe them for their help. But the word owe felt less like a debt and more like a cage, one whose bars were closing in around them all. Their gratitude had become a chain. Rostova's mind raced, connecting variables, weighing probabilities. The Cathar expected a protest, a show of force, or a frustrated retreat. They were prepared for anger. They were not prepared for an audit. Open a channel to the Cathar flagship, she commanded. Formal diplomatic band. I want their benefactor-in-chief on screen. The bridge crew moved with quiet efficiency. The main view screen shimmered, replaced by the regal, kittenous face of the Cathar benefactor. Its multifaceted eyes regarded Rostova with an unnerving placidity. It wore its authority like a second skin. Commander Rostova of the Terran Mandate. The benefactor's voice resonated, a smooth, cultured tone that was somehow more menacing than a snarl. An unexpected pleasure. I trust you are admiring the fruits of our humble assistance. Viridia thrives, a testament to interspecies cooperation. Rostova met its gaze without flinching. Benefactor, your assistance comes with a price tag that Viridia cannot possibly pay. You are levying a debt of perpetuity. The Cathar tilted its head, a gesture of mock contemplation. It is not debt, Commander. It is a tithe of gratitude, a small token to honor the hand that lifted them from the dust. Surely a species as emotionally resonant as yours understands the importance of gratitude. The word was a scalpel used with surgical precision. They turned virtue into a shackle. This was the moment. The first move in a game played on a board of law and public perception. We do not dispute the principle of reciprocity. Benefactor Rostova said, her voice like ice. We dispute the accounting. The Terran Mandate formally requests a public inquiry to be arbitrated by the Aurora Court to verify the ledgers of your developmental aid. She saw a flicker in those compound eyes, a fractional hesitation that told her she had struck a nerve. The Cathar had built their empire on opaque contracts and the silent threat of overwhelming force. The one thing they could not afford was transparency. They built their prisons in the dark. The benefactor's calm facade remained, but a new coldness entered its voice. An inquiry on what grounds our agreements are matters of public record celebrated by the very people we have helped. It gestured vaguely toward the planet below. Ask the Viridians. They will tell you of our generosity. Rostova allowed a small, sharp smile to touch her lips. Then you will have no objection to opening your ledgers. Unless, of course, the record contains information you would prefer to remain uncelebrated. She had laid the trap. To refuse the inquiry was an admission of guilt. To accept it was to step into her arena. The court of public opinion was a battlefield they were unaccustomed to. The silence stretched thick and heavy. The benefactor was recalculating its vast intellect, processing the unexpected challenge. The Terrans were supposed to be sentimental idealists, easily cowed by legal complexity. They were not supposed to bring accountants to a standoff. Your request is irregular, Commander, it finally said. But the Cathar Dominion values transparency. We will accede to your inquiry. The Aurora Court will be notified. But be warned, it added, its voice dropping to a silken threat. Frivolous accusations carry a heavy cost. We will expect to be compensated for our time. The screen went dark. Rostova let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. We have them, she thought. The inquiry was a mirror, and she was about to force the Cathar to look into it. A system built on lies cannot survive the truth. Archimedes, she ordered, her voice ringing with newfound resolve. Begin compiling the preliminary brief for the court. Title it The Viridian Intervention. Focus on the 3% discrepancy. We will turn that crack into a chasm. Jax looked at her, a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. They took the bait, Commander. Rostova nodded, her gaze returning to the green and blue world hanging in the void. Yes, they did. They believe their fortress of law is impregnable. They've forgotten that a fortress can also be a tomb. The path was set. The first battle would not be fought with weapons but with ledgers and laws. It was a fight for the soul of Viridia, and Rostova would not allow it to be sold for a song of false gratitude. The next few cycles were a blur of meticulous preparation. Rostova's legal team, a small dedicated group of specialists, worked tirelessly with Archimedes. They dissected every byte of Cathar data, every frame of their aid deliveries, every energy signature logged during their presence in the Viridian system. The ship's corridors, normally quiet and orderly, buzzed with a new intensity. Data streams flowed like rivers through the ship's network, converging on the tactical room, which had been converted into a legal command center. Rostova rarely left the bridge, subsisting on nutrient paste and sheer determination. She knew the Cathar were doing the same, preparing their defenses, polishing their arguments. The law was their chosen battlefield, but they had never faced an opponent who revered it as she did. Our laws are not suggestions. They are promises. A junior analyst specialist, Thorn, brought her a data slate, his eyes wide with discovery. Commander, we found it. It's small, but it's undeniable. He pointed to a complex energy schematic. During the atmospheric reseeding, the Cathar support ships deployed what they called weather stabilization arrays. According to their own logs, these arrays drew ambient energy from the planet's ionosphere. Rostova leaned closer, and Thorn tapped the slate, highlighting a series of numbers that glowed red. The arrays didn't just draw ambient energy. They performed a micro-scale energy siphon, drawing power directly from Viridia's geothermal grid. It was masked as heat dissipation. They were billing the Viridians for the power they were secretly stealing from them. A hidden tax baked into the gift itself. It was the perfect Cathar scheme, an act of theft disguised as an act of service. The energy drain was small, almost negligible on a planetary scale, but it was a deliberate, calculated deception. It was the crack she needed. Quantify it, Thorn, Rostova ordered. Calculate the total energy siphoned, its market value, and the interest compounded over the entire period of their assistance. I want a number down to the last joule. Archimedes interjected, its calm voice cutting through the hushed excitement. Calculation complete, Commander. The total value of the siphoned energy, adjusted for market rates, FAS, and compounded interest, amounts to approximately 1.2% of the total gratitude tithe levied against Viridia. Not a knockout blow, but a solid, undeniable jab. It was proof of bad faith. Their entire case rested on their benevolent intent. This proved it was a lie. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived. The Aurora Court convened not in a physical chamber, but in a secured nexus of light and data, a virtual space accessible to all certified parties. Rostova stood on the Aegis's bridge, which was now configured as her tribunal chamber. A holographic display dominated the center of the room, showing the serene, impartial sigil of the Aurora Court, a balanced scale held within a starburst. The Cathar benefactor appeared as a life-sized avatar, its composure absolute. 3 arbiters, beings of pure energy from a non-corporeal species, known for their unwavering impartiality, materialized as shimmering columns of light. Their voices echoed with the weight of cosmic law. There was no hiding from a judge who could read the ledger of your soul. The lead arbiter spoke its voice, a chorus of harmonious tones. This inquiry is convened to assess the claim of bad faith filed by the Terran Mandate against the Cathar Dominion regarding the Viridian tithe. Commander Rostova, you have the floor. Rostova stepped forward, her uniform crisp, her bearing resolute. She did not begin with accusations. She began with praise. Honorable arbiters, the principle of reciprocity is a cornerstone of civilized interstellar relations. The Cathar Dominion has on the surface rendered a great service to the people of Viridia. We are here not to contest the act of giving, but to scrutinize the act of accounting. She was laying a foundation of reason, not rhetoric. She presented Thorne's findings with cold, clinical precision. Energy schematics, Cathar logs, Viridian grid outputs, all displayed for the court to see. The evidence is clear, she concluded. A hidden surcharge, a secret tax was applied. A small amount, to be sure, but the size of the lie does not alter its nature. It was a deception, and it invalidates the premise of a tithe, freely given in gratitude. The benefactor's avatar remained impassive, but Rostova could feel its silent fury radiating across the void. It had expected a debate on philosophy. She had brought a calculator. The numbers did not lie. The benefactor responded with practiced ease, its voice a soothing balm of condescension. A regrettable accounting error. Honorable arbiters, a minor miscalibration in our stabilization arrays. To suggest this was a deliberate act of malice is an insult to our long and storied history of philanthropy. It performed a gesture of magnanimity. We will, of course, immediately reimburse the Viridian Council for this trivial oversight. With interest. We are, after all, beings of honor. It was a masterful defense, dismissing the theft as a rounding error, a trifle. It sought to paint her as petty, obsessed with minutiae, while ignoring the grand gesture of their aid. They were trying to drown the truth in a sea of goodwill. But Rostova was ready. An error, she countered, her voice sharp. Archimedes display Cathar maintenance log 7 Gamma 4. A new document appeared, a string of complex code. This log from a Cathar engineering drone details a recalibration of the very arrays in question. The drone notes, and I quote, "Energy siphon efficiency optimized to 99% of detectable threshold." This was no error. It was an optimization. It was a conscious, deliberate choice to take as much as they could without being caught. The court was silent. The drone's log was a smoking gun. The Cathar's lie was laid bare, exposed in their own words. The mirror was showing them their true face. On Viridia, the proceedings were being broadcast to every public screen. In a small town square, a crowd watched in stunned silence. The engineer Leo stood with his family, his eyes fixed on the holographic display. He had helped install the very geothermal converters the Cathar had tapped into. He remembered their engineers, so helpful, so solicitous. He had thanked them. He felt a hot wave of shame and anger wash over him. His daughter Ilara looked up at him, her small face etched with confusion. "Papa, we're the star friends, not our friends." Leo knelt and hugged her tight. "Sometimes, sweetie," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "The prettiest masks hide the ugliest faces." The seed of doubt had been planted. The lead arbiter's voice filled the virtual chamber once more. "The evidence of deliberate deception is compelling. The Cathar Dominion's claim of a simple error is insufficient." The benefactor's composure finally cracked. A ripple of frustration disturbed its avatar's perfect image. "This is a procedural distraction. The Terran Mandate focuses on a single misplaced decimal point while ignoring the salvation of a world. We brought rain to their deserts, stability to their tectonics, knowledge to their minds. The tithe is just a small price for survival." Its voice rose, losing its cultured calm, revealing the arrogant core beneath. The mask was slipping. When you peel back the layers of a tyrant, all you find is a bully. The price of survival should not be servitude. Rostova shot back, her voice ringing with conviction. You did not offer them a partnership. You offered them a gilded kyohon. You placed a collar of debt around their necks and called it a necklace of gratitude. The law does not recognize a contract signed under duress, and a tithe extracted through deception is nothing more than extortion with better marketing. She had turned their own language against them, reframing their benevolence as the predatory act it was. She was not just arguing a case, she was challenging their entire philosophy. She was putting their soul on trial. The arbiter's shimmering form seemed to lean forward. The evidence of bad faith is sufficient to proceed to a full inquiry. The Cathar Dominion will be required to submit all unredacted logs, financial records, and internal communications related to the Viridian Aid Project. This court will conduct a full audit. The hearing is adjourned until the data is received and verified. The sigil of the court pulsed once and the connection was severed. The benefactor's avatar vanished, leaving only the quiet hum of the Aegis's bridge. They had won the first round, but in doing so they had cornered a very dangerous animal. A predator is most dangerous when it is wounded. Jax let out a long, slow whistle. Commander, that was a thing of beauty. You didn't just beat them. You made them beat themselves. Rostova felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, the adrenaline of the confrontation fading. This is just the beginning, Jax. They will fight back. They will bury us in legal motions, procedural delays, and political pressure. They will try to make this so expensive, so exhausting, that we give up. She looked out at Viridia, a jewel she had just shielded from a thief's grasp. But we won't. We can't. The cost of justice is always high, but the cost of injustice is higher. The next phase of the fight began immediately. The Cathar, true to form, did not resist openly. Instead, they complied with a malicious precision. They flooded the court's servers with data, exabytes of it. It was a deluge of information, a blizzard of white noise designed to overwhelm. Tucked within the terabytes of useless diagnostic reports and redundant shipping manifests were the critical pieces of evidence they were legally required to provide. It was a search for a needle in a digital haystack the size of a nebula. They were trying to win by attrition to drown the inquiry in paperwork. "They're burying us." Commander Thorne reported, his face grim, his eyes bloodshot from staring at data streams for 30 hours straight. Archimedes is filtering and sorting, but the sheer volume is astronomical. We're looking for a handful of specific logs among trillions of irrelevancies. Rostova walked through her makeshift legal command, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and hot electronics. Her team was flagging their morale fraying under the relentless assault of useless information. The Cathar weren't just hiding the truth. They were making the search for it an act of punishment. An enemy who weaponizes boredom is a foe to be respected. Rostova stopped at Archimedes' central terminal. "Is there a pattern to the data dump?" she asked the AI. "A methodology to the chaos?" The AI's voice was, as always, a sea of calm. "There is, Commander. The data is structured to maximize processing time. Key files are fragmented and scattered across unrelated archives. The file names are randomized and the metadata has been stripped. It is a textbook example of hostile compliance. It was legal warfare at its most insidious. They were following the letter of the law while violating its spirit in every way imaginable. They gave you the library, but they burned the card catalog. Then we stopped looking for the needles. Rostova declared, a new idea sparking in her mind. We analyzed the haystack. The team looked at her confused. Thorn, you said their logs were stripped of metadata, but the act of stripping it of randomizing the file names, that leaves a signature, doesn't it? A digital footprint. Thorn's eyes lit up with understanding. Yes. The process of obfuscation is itself a process. It creates its own data. We can't search by what the files are, but we can search by what was done to them. A new path had opened. They wouldn't search for the documents. They'd search for the shadows the documents cast. Archimedes Rostova commanded, her voice sharp with renewed purpose. Cease content analysis. Begin a meta-analysis. I want you to scan for the signature of data obfuscation. Look for fragmented files with randomized names created in the same nanosecond as the court order was issued. Cross-reference that with the energy signatures of the Cathar servers. Find the pattern of the cover-up itself. It was a long shot, a gamble that the Cathar's attempt to hide the evidence would be more visible than the evidence itself. It was a legal judo throw using the opponent's own weight and aggression against them. Hours turned into a day, then two. The bridge was a tense, silent vigil, the only sound the soft hum of the ship's life support and the occasional click of a console. Then a single clear chime echoed through the room. Archimedes spoke. Pattern identified, Commander. A statistically significant correlation exists between files related to resource acquisition and the highest levels of data obfuscation. I have isolated 72,000 file fragments. I am now reassembling them. The haystack was yielding its secrets. The screen lit up with a reassembled document, its title clear and damning, Project Antaeus Covert Resource Extraction Protocols. It was their playbook. Their entire strategy of parasitic aid laid bare. You can hide a single lie, but you cannot hide a doctrine of lies. The document was more than a smoking gun. It was an encyclopedia of their crimes. It detailed how to identify vulnerable pre-warp societies. It outlined the process of offering aid that would create systemic dependency. It contained the technical specifications for the energy siphon's water reclamation systems that secretly introduced trace minerals to inhibit local agriculture and educational software that subtly rewrote a species' history to glorify the Cathar. It was a blueprint for cultural and economic annihilation, gift-wrapped in charity. And at the end of the document was a seal of approval from the Cathar benefactor himself. The monster had signed his confession. Recall the court. Rostova said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. Immediately. This time there would be no debate about accounting errors. This time she would hold up a mirror so large it would reflect their entire corrupt civilization. She would not just win the case for Viridia. She would break the Cathar's most powerful weapon, their reputation. Justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it is justice sharpened. The Aurora Court reconvened. The three arbiters materialized, their forms seeming to crackle with anticipation. The Cathar benefactor's avatar appeared, its composure restored, radiating an aura of bored condescension. It clearly expected another round of procedural squabbling. It was not prepared for the blow that was about to land. Commander Rostova, the lead arbiter, intoned, "You have new evidence to present." Rostova nodded slowly. "We do, honorable arbiters. We have the Cathar's own operational doctrine for their philanthropic endeavors." She had Archimedes display Project Antaeus on the main screen. The benefactor's avatar froze. For a fraction of a second, the mask of civility vaporized, revealing a flash of pure primal fury. It was the look of a king who had just been checkmated by a pawn. "This document is a fabrication," It hissed its voice, losing all its cultured smoothness. A desperate forgery by a species that cannot comprehend true altruism. You seek to tear us down with lies because you cannot match our greatness. But the lie was transparent. The document was laced with Cathar encryption markers, digital watermarks that were impossible to fake. It was undeniably authentic. The truth has a weight that lies cannot bear. Rostova did not even bother to rebut the accusation of forgery. She simply let the document speak for itself. She had Archimedes highlight key passages, the cold, calculating instructions for how to turn a helping hand into a fist of control. She showed the court the protocols for creating dependency, the charts projecting the exact point at which a partner species would become a permanent client state. She showed them the cost-benefit analysis of gratitude versus fear. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, and utterly damning. She had not found a crack in their armor. She had detonated an explosive charge from within. On the Stardust Drifter, Leo and his family watched again their little cabin silent, as the contents of Project Antaeus were revealed. Leo's wife began to weep silently. All the small, unsettling things they had ignored, the new seeds that failed to sprout the water, that tasted slightly off the children's history lessons that seemed to have less and less to do with Viridia, it all clicked into place. They had not been helped. They had been colonized. Their home was not a beneficiary. It was a resource to be harvested. The feeling was not anger anymore. It was a deep, chilling sense of violation. They had been betrayed in the most intimate way possible by their own hope. Their trust had been a weapon turned against them. The lead arbiter's voice was like the cracking of a glacier. Benefactor of the Cathar Dominion, this court finds that the evidence presented is conclusive. Your actions in the Viridian system were not charity. They were predatory. The gratitude tithe is not a recognition of aid. It is a mechanism of systemic exploitation. The arbiter paused, the silence stretching into an eternity. This court hereby nullifies the Viridian tithe in its entirety. All Cathar assets in the Viridian system are forfeit as reparations. A public ledger of this judgment will be broadcast across all neutral networks. The verdict was absolute. It was not just a legal defeat. It was a moral annihilation. But Rostova was not done. She had promised mirror justice. Honorable arbiters, she said, stepping forward once more. Nullifying the debt is only the first step. The damage done to Viridia is not merely financial, it is systemic. The Cathar have poisoned their soil, corrupted their education, and damaged their infrastructure under the guise of improving it. She turned her gaze to the benefactor's avatar, her eyes like chips of flint. Justice is not merely the absence of oppression. It is the presence of restoration. You do not heal a wound by simply removing the knife. You must also clean the infection. Therefore, she continued, we propose a final measure. A mirror tithe. The Cathar Dominion will be required to pay for the full and complete restoration of Viridia. They will provide the technology, the resources, and the labor to undo every bit of damage they have caused, and they will do so with no expectation of gratitude, no contract of reciprocity, and no title of benefactor. They will do it as a simple raw repayment of a debt. The cost will be calculated and verified by this court, and the ledger will be public. She was not just demanding reparations. She was demanding that the Cathar perform the very benevolence they had faked for so long. She was forcing them to become the mask they had worn. The benefactor's avatar flickered wildly, unable to maintain its form in the face of such a monumental reversal. This was a punishment it could not comprehend. They were a proud, ancient empire. The idea of performing unpaid labor for a species they considered little more than cattle was anathema to their entire culture. It was an insult that cut deeper than any financial penalty. This is... this is an outrage, an unprecedented humiliation. It sputtered. The lead arbiter's voice was unmoved. It is not humiliation, it is justice. You built a system based on the principle of reciprocity. The court is merely applying your own principles back to you. The mirror tithe is ratified. The scales of justice had not only been balanced, they had been reversed. The court beacon on the Aegis's bridge pulsed a final time, a deep emerald green signifying the judgment was locked and recorded. The connection severed. The inquiry was over. Jax and the bridge crew erupted into a quiet but profound celebration. Thorn was slumped in his chair, exhausted but smiling. They had done the impossible. They had defeated an empire without firing a single shot. They had fought a war of ideas and won a total victory. Rostova watched them for a moment, a rare, genuine smile on her face. Then she turned to the main view screen, where the planet Viridia hung now free. The Cathar ships were already beginning their slow, sullen withdrawal. They had arrived as landlords. They would now return as janitors. Her work was not yet finished. She opened a channel to the Viridian Planetary Council. The face of the council president appeared an old woman with eyes that had seen too much hardship. Those eyes were now filled with tears of disbelief and overwhelming relief. Commander Rostova, she began, her voice choked with emotion. We don't know how to thank you. You have given us back our future. Rostova's expression was gentle but firm. You don't have to thank us, she said. Your future was always yours. You just needed to be reminded of that. The only thing we ask is that you remember how easily a gift can become a debt. Build your own future, stand on your own feet, and never ever let anyone put a collar on you again, no matter how beautifully it shines. The lesson had to be learned not just by the Cathar, but by their victims as well. Freedom once reclaimed must be vigilantly guarded. As the Aegis prepared to leave the system, Archimedes spoke its synthesized voice, holding a new, almost imperceptible note of something that might have been curiosity. Commander, my calculations indicated a 34% probability that the Cathar would respond to the mirror tithe with military force. They did not. Their response was illogical. Rostova looked at the retreating Cathar fleet. It wasn't illogical, Archimedes. It was pragmatic. We didn't just defeat them in court. We defeated them in the court of public opinion. Every system they have a partnership with is watching this broadcast. If they had attacked us, they would have proven our point for us. Their empire isn't held together by ships. It's held together by the illusion of their benevolence. We shattered the illusion. The AI was silent for a long moment. The human capacity for leveraging intangible concepts like reputation and shame is a variable I am still learning to model. It is highly effective. A message arrived from Mandate Command. It was a single line of text, but it was all the recognition Rostova needed. Precedent locked. Well done, Aegis. The Aurora Court had officially codified the Rostova Doctrine. From this day forward, any act of aid that created a state of permanent dependency would be legally defined as predation. The Cathar's favorite weapon had been outlawed across the entire civilized galaxy. A single ship armed with a single idea had changed the law for everyone. The victory was not just for Viridia, it was for all the Viridias yet to come. A just law is a shield for the weak and a cage for the strong. The cost had been high. 2 of her legal team had suffered neural strain from the sheer cognitive load of the data analysis and would need months of recovery. The Aegis itself had diverted so much power to its computational systems for so long that its main drive was in need of a full overhaul. It was a quiet, unglamorous price paid not in blood and fire but in energy and exhaustion. But as Rostova looked at the public ledger entry now being broadcast across the quadrant, the words Viridian Tithe, nullified flashing in stark, undeniable script, she knew it had been worth it. The ledger was the memory of the galaxy, and this memory would now protect countless others. A victory paid in treasure is temporary. A victory paid in principle is eternal. Rostova ordered the Aegis to set a course for the next star system on its patrol route. The bridge was calm, returning to its normal rhythm. The great legal battle was over, but she knew this was just one front in a much larger war, a war against the quiet, insidious forms of tyranny that festered in the dark corners of the galaxy. It was a war fought not with torpedoes, but with truth. And truth, she reflected, was a weapon that never ran out of ammunition. The universe was full of monsters. Some had claws and fangs, others had contracts and smiles. Both needed to be fought. Before they jumped, she took one last look at Viridia. A small civilian freighter, the Stardust Drifter, sent them a final simple message. It wasn't a formal diplomatic communication. It was a child's drawing transmitted over the open channel. It showed a big gray ship standing guard over a small green planet, shielding it from a fleet of black spiky ships. Underneath, in a child's scrawl, were two words, "Thank you." Rostova allowed herself another small smile. That was a gratitude that came with no strings attached. It was the only kind that mattered. The kind that was earned, not demanded. The Aegis engaged its jump drive, the stars outside the view screen stretching into long lines of light before collapsing into the swirling vortex of hyperspace. The Viridian system was behind them, a single victory in an endless struggle. But a precedent had been set. A line had been drawn. The galaxy had been shown that the law could be a sword as well as a shield, and that humans, for all their sentimentality and emotion, understood one thing very, very well: a debt must be paid, a promise must be kept, and a lie must eventually face a reckoning. They had learned that the arc of the moral universe was long, but it bent toward justice. Rostova walked to her ready room, the adrenaline finally giving way to a profound sense of weary satisfaction. The fight had been draining a marathon of intellect and will. She had faced down an empire and forced it to its knees using nothing but its own rulebook. The Cathar had believed themselves to be masters of the law, but they had only ever been its abusers. They had mistaken the complex grammar of justice for its soul. They saw the words, but they could not hear the music. Humans, she mused, were different. They were messy, illogical, and infuriatingly emotional, but they understood the music. Her first officer, Jax, met her at the door. "New orders from Command Eva," he said, using her first name now that they were off the bridge. He held out a data slate. "It seems another fledgling colony on the other side of the sector. The Signans have just gratefully accepted a development package from a Cathar benefactor fleet." Rostova took the slate, her eyes scanning the preliminary report. It was the same pattern, the same predatory benevolence. The Cathar were not going to give up their methods easily. They would simply move to a new, unsuspecting neighborhood. The work was never truly done. Rostova looked up from the slate, and the weariness in her eyes was replaced by a familiar steely resolve. "Plot a course, Jax," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "And get the legal team ready. It seems another class is about to be in session." Justice was not a destination. It was a journey. And the Aegis was already on its way. The ledger remembered, and the ledger demanded balance. Her ship was the instrument of that balance, a scalpel of law in a galaxy rife with infection. It was a heavy burden, but it was a righteous one. She returned to the bridge, the hum of the ship a familiar comfort. Archimedes had already begun preliminary analysis on the Signan situation, data scrolling across a secondary screen. The patterns were depressingly familiar. The same offers of aid, the same opaque contracts, the same subtle slide into dependency. But this time there was a difference. This time there was a precedent. The Rostova Doctrine was now law. The fight would still be hard, but they would not be starting from scratch. They had a weapon now forged in the fires of the Viridian Inquiry. A weapon made of truth. A weapon the Cathar could not defeat. They knew how to fight power with power. They had no idea how to fight it with principle. As the Aegis sped through the non-space of hyperspace, a silent sentinel on an endless patrol, Rostova, allowed herself a moment of reflection. They had won. They had won cleanly, legally, and morally. They hadn't destroyed the Cathar, but they had forced them to be better. They had held up a mirror and demanded they look at their own reflection. That, she thought, was the human way. Not to exterminate the monster, but to teach it through painful, undeniable logic how to be a person. It was a harder path, a longer path, but it was the only path worth taking. The universe did not need more conquerors, it needed more teachers. The Cygnus system was bathed in the light of a younger, fiercer star. The planet Cygna IV was a world of harsh contrasts, purple deserts abutting turquoise seas, its atmosphere still bearing the telltale haze of recent rapid terraforming. The Cathar were here, their fleet, a familiar scar against the celestial backdrop. But something was wrong. Their ships were fewer, their posture less overtly proprietary. They orbited in a configuration that suggested partnership, not occupation. And as the Aegis translated from hyperspace, they were greeted not with a legal writ, but with a welcome message. It came from the Cygnan government itself. Terran Mandate Vessel Aegis, the message began, the voice of the Cygnan official warm and confident. We welcome you to our system. We are aware of the recent misunderstanding in the Viridian sector. Please be assured our arrangement with the Cathar Dominion is fully compliant with the Rostova Doctrine. We are partners, not protectorates. The message ended with a cordial but firm sign-off. Your assistance is not required at this time. Jax turned to Rostova, his brow furrowed. Well, that's a new one. They're using the doctrine as a shield against us. The Cathar had not just learned their lesson, they had weaponized it. They were hiding behind the very law she had created to stop them. Rostova's legal team was already at work poring over the Cygnan-Cathar agreements, which had been helpfully attached to the welcome message. The contracts were pristine. Every clause was clear, every contingency outlined. There were no hidden surcharges, no secret siphons. The technology provided was valued fairly. The terms of reciprocity were balanced and finite. On paper, it was the model of a healthy interstellar partnership. It was perfect. Too perfect. A flawless defense is often the best evidence of a well-hidden crime. It's a fortress commander, her lead legal officer, reported, her face a mask of frustrated admiration. There's no angle of attack. Everything is transparent. The Cygnans have full access to all logs, all maintenance schedules. The Cathar have been meticulous. Rostova paced the bridge, her boots making soft, rhythmic sounds on the deck plating. The Cathar were too arrogant to simply change their ways. They would have found a new, more subtle collar. If the cage isn't visible in the contract, she mused aloud, it must be built into the bars themselves. She turned to Archimedes. Analyze the technology they've provided. The atmospheric processors, the water purifiers, the agricultural nanoforges. Cross-reference their stated performance with their deep-level engineering schematics. Find the feature they aren't advertising. In a sprawling government complex on Cygna IV, planetary administrator, Lorian addressed his council. His face was projected holographically across the chamber, his expression radiating a hard-won optimism. The Cathar have given us the tools to build a paradise, he declared, his voice swelling with pride. Our air is clean, our water is pure, our harvests are bountiful for the first time in a century. And now the Terrans arrive, bringing with them suspicion and doubt, eager to undo our progress. A younger council member shifted uncomfortably. But sir, the warnings from Viridia. Lorien cut him off with a wave of his hand. The Viridians were naive. We are not. Our contracts are ironclad. The Terrans see exploitation everywhere because it is all they know. They cannot comprehend a galaxy built on trust. The council chamber murmured in agreement. Their newfound prosperity felt too good to question. A cage made of comfort is the hardest to see. The AI's response was quick, but it was not the answer Rostova wanted. The technology is remarkable, Commander Archimedes reported. Its efficiency ratings are even higher than Cathar marketing materials suggest. There are no hidden backdoors in the software, no planned obsolescence coded into the hardware. By all available metrics, the equipment is designed to function flawlessly for its entire operational lifespan. A dead end. The Cathar had created a perfect gift. But Rostova knew there was no such thing. The perfect crime is the one where the victim begs you to commit it. Commander Jax interjected, pulling up a new file on the main screen. Maybe we're looking in the wrong place. It's not the tech. It's the maintenance. He highlighted a section of the agreement. The Cathar are providing all maintenance free of charge for the first 20 years. It's part of the aid package. Rostova read the clause carefully. It seemed generous, another point in the Cathar's favor. But Jax was right. It was the only part of the equation they still controlled completely. What happens after 20 years? She asked. Jax zoomed in on another clause. After 20 years, the Signans can assume maintenance themselves or contract the Cathar to continue at standard market rates. It all seemed reasonable. It was a legal masterpiece. This is a new kind of war, Eva Jax said, his voice low. They're not trying to beat us in court. They're trying to make us irrelevant. By the time we could ever hope to prove wrongdoing, 20 years will have passed, and the Signans will be so intertwined with Cathar systems that they'll see them as their saviors. He was right. The Cathar were playing the long game. They were building a prison one day at a time, and the inmates were happily helping to build the walls. They were not fighting a fleet. They were fighting an idea. Rostova knew a formal inquiry was impossible. She had no evidence, no cause of action. The Signans themselves would file a formal protest against her if she tried. She needed a new strategy. She needed to create a stage, a moment of public theater that would force the Cathar to reveal their hand. We can't challenge the contract, she said, her plan beginning to form. So we'll audit the gift. We will formally request to conduct a joint public audit of the Cathar technology in the spirit of interstellar cooperation and knowledge sharing. We will praise their engineering, celebrate their generosity. We will wrap our investigation in so much flattery they'll choke on it. To refuse such a public-spirited request would look suspicious. To accept it would let her inside their fortress. The wolf would arrive wearing the sheep's own wool. She transmitted the request to both the Signan government and the Cathar fleet. As she expected, the Signans were annoyed, but could find no legitimate grounds to refuse a public scientific audit. The Cathar benefactor, a different one from the Viridian affair, but with the same chilling politeness, agreed with a flourish of diplomatic grace. We would be honored to demonstrate the fruits of our labor, Commander. Transparency is, after all, a virtue we share. The trap was set. Now she just had to figure out what she was trying to catch. What was the hidden flaw in a perfect machine? The answer, she suspected, was not in the machine itself. It was in the hands of its keeper. The audit took place on Cygna 4 in the primary atmospheric processing station, a vast, gleaming facility that hummed with quiet power. Rostova and a small engineering team led by a brilliant but taciturn lieutenant named Kenji were escorted by Administrator Lorian and a contingent of Cathar engineers. The benefactor observed remotely its avatar, a silent hovering presence in the corner of the main control room. The air was thick with professional courtesy, a strained politeness that was colder than any open hostility. They were smiling enemies, daggers hidden behind their backs. Kenji and his team went to work their scanners and diagnostic tools covering every inch of the Cathar machinery. The Cygnan and Cathar engineers watched their expressions, a mixture of pride and suspicion. For hours, the results were the same. The machinery was flawless. The energy consumption was minimal. The output was stable. The structural integrity was perfect. Lorian looked at Rostova with a smug, knowing smile. "Are you satisfied yet, Commander? Or does your paranoia require further indulgence?" His words were sharp, a public challenge to her authority. The moment was slipping away. She had nothing. A leader who cannot find a problem often becomes the problem. Rostova ignored him. She watched Kenji, who was staring intently at a diagnostic screen, a deep frown on his face. He wasn't looking at the performance metrics. He was looking at the raw material composition of a key filtering component. Lieutenant Rostova asked, her voice quiet. Kenji looked up, his eyes holding a strange light. "Commander, I need a micro-level material analysis. The molecular structure of this filter, it's organic. An organic component in a high-stress atmospheric processor. It made no sense. It was like building a battleship's engine out of wood." At Rostova's insistence, they were allowed to take a sample for analysis back on the Aegis. The Cathar agreed, confident that this was another dead end. Lorian scoffed openly at the delay. As Rostova's team departed, the benefactor's avatar spoke for the first time, its voice dripping with false concern. "Do be careful with that sample, Commander. Our bioalloys are quite delicate. They require a specific touch." It was a warning disguised as advice. And in that moment, Rostova knew she had found it. The flaw wasn't a weakness. It was a need. Back on the Aegis, the ship's advanced labs worked on the sample. The answer came back within the hour. Archimedes delivered the report, its calm voice narrating a story of breathtakingly cynical biological engineering. The filter is a symbiotic bioform, Commander, a custom-engineered microbe colony. It is incredibly efficient at scrubbing contaminants from the atmosphere. However, it requires a specific enzymatic compound to survive. Without a fresh infusion of this enzyme every 30 days, the colony will die, and the entire atmospheric processor will fail. The cage was not made of steel. It was made of biology. Jack stared at the report, his face pale with disbelief. The enzyme, let me guess, it can only be synthesized by the Cathar. Archimedes confirmed his suspicion. "Correct, Lieutenant Commander. The enzyme is keyed to their unique genetic signature. Replicating it without their biological material is a task of monumental complexity. This was the unseen caller. The Cathar weren't going to bill them for maintenance. They were going to bill them for the planet's oxygen. It was the ultimate subscription model. The price of the cure was the disease itself. The brilliance of the scheme was its deniability. The Cathar could claim it was simply the most efficient technology they had. The need for the enzyme wasn't a flaw. It was a feature of a superior biological system. They had not broken the new law. They had hollowed it out from the inside. Rostova now had her proof, but it was useless in a traditional court. Proving dependency by design would be a legal quagmire. The Cathar would bury her in expert testimony and scientific debate. She needed to do more than win an argument. She had to break the system itself. "We can't just expose this Archimedes," she said, the final piece of her plan clicking into place. "We have to fix it. Can you synthesize a replacement for the enzyme? Something the Signans can produce themselves." Silent for several seconds, its processors running trillions of simulations. "Theoretically, yes, but it would require a complete rewrite of the microbe's genetic code. I would need to broadcast a precisely calibrated resonance frequency directly into every piece of Cathar biotech on the planet simultaneously. It would be computationally intensive. It was a colossal risk, a system-wide firmware update for a living machine. This was the mirror justice she had envisioned. She would not just expose their trap, she would dismantle it. She would take their greatest secret, their mastery of biological engineering, and turn it into a gift for everyone. "And the energy cost for such a broadcast?" Rostova asked. The AI's answer was stark. It would require 63% of the Aegis's total power reserves diverted through the main deflector dish. The ship would be effectively disabled for several hours afterward, a state of extreme vulnerability. It was a cost, a tangible risk. A victory that is not earned is a victory that is not valued. There is another way Archimedes added its logic, pushing into uncomfortable territory. The Viridian judgment authorized the seizure of Cathar assets as reparations. Their fleet in this system contains more than enough power. We could extract it forcibly. It was a shocking proposal from the dispassionate AI, a direct physical confrontation. Jax looked at Rostova, his eyes wide. This was the escalation, using the law not as a shield, but as a spear. "Do it," Rostova said without hesitation. "Draft a legal writ of seizure under the Viridian precedent, citing the Cathar's violation of the Rostova Doctrine's intent. We will inform the Signans and the Cathar exactly what we are doing and why. The ledger must be visible to all." They would not just take the power, they would issue a receipt. A tense quiet fell over the bridge of the Aegis. The writ had been sent. On the main view screen, the Cathar fleet held its position, their ships like silent obsidian daggers. They had responded with a single word: unacceptable. Administrator Lorian, on behalf of the Signan government, had issued a furious protest, accusing Rostova of piracy and reckless endangerment. They were still in defending their jailers. The final pieces of the plan were in place. It was time to teach the lesson. A teacher does not ask for permission to educate. They simply begin the lecture. Archimedes Rostova commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "Begin the resonance broadcast. Target every piece of Cathar biotechnology on Signa 4 and begin the energy transfer. Show them the price of their education." The ship shuddered as vast amounts of power were routed to the main deflector. A brilliant beam of pure white light, almost invisible to the naked eye, but humming with unimaginable data, shot from the Aegis toward the planet below. It was the cure delivered like a lightning bolt. Simultaneously, a second set of beams, shimmering tendrils of emerald green light, lashed out from the Aegis and connected to the Cathar ships. They were not weapons. They were siphons. The bridge crew watched in awed silence. On the tactical display, the Cathar ships' power levels began to drop, their shields flickering as their own energy was drawn from them. The Aegis's power levels held steady, the incoming energy perfectly balancing the outgoing broadcast. It was a sublime, terrifying piece of engineering. A system-scale transfer of power with the public ledger entry displayed on every open channel in the sector: Cathar Dominion asset seizure, payment for forced rectification of predatory engineering. Viridian Precedent 4.7. They were paying to fix the very trap they had set, and the whole galaxy was watching them do it. Justice is a cold equation, and the ledger always balances. On Cygna 4 inside the atmospheric processor, Administrator Lorian watched in horror as his Cathar advisors shrieked in panic. The biofilters were glowing with a soft blue light. Their diagnostic panels flashed with incomprehensible data. "What's happening?" Lorian demanded. A Cathar engineer turned to him, its chitinous face a mask of disbelief and rage. "They've rewritten the genetics. The microbes. They no longer require the enzyme. They're self-sustaining." In that moment, the entire suffocating truth of his situation crashed down on Lorian. He had not been a partner. He had been a crop. His pride shattered, replaced by a profound, chilling shame. He had been so eager for the gift, he had never bothered to check if it came with a chain. The broadcast lasted for 17 minutes. When it was over, the tendrils of green light connecting the ships vanished. The Cathar fleet was crippled, their power reserves drained to minimum safe levels. The Aegis, its own power core, strained but intact, stood silent vigil. The cure had been administered. The lesson had been delivered. On Cygna 4, every piece of Cathar technology was now truly the property of the Cygnan people, free and clear of any hidden dependencies. The invisible collar had been vaporized. The Cathar benefactor opened a channel. Its avatar was distorted, flickering with the flagship's power failures. Its voice was no longer smooth or cultured. It was the raw, guttural snarl of a defeated predator. "You have destroyed us, human, our greatest technological advantage, given away. You have not just punished us. You have lobotomized our entire civilization." Rostova met its raging, multifaceted eyes. "You did this to yourselves," she said, her voice devoid of triumph, holding only the cold weight of necessity. "You built a house of cards on a foundation of lies. All I did was open a window." She cut the connection. There was nothing more to say. A truth cannot be debated. It can only be accepted. The aftermath was quiet. The Cathar fleet, humbled and neutered, slowly limped out of the Cygnus system, a silent parade of shame. The Cygnan government, led by a deeply penitent administrator, Lorian, sent a simple, heartfelt message of gratitude, along with a formal petition to the Aurora Court to co-sponsor a new amendment to interstellar law. The cost of the victory was felt on the Aegis. The main deflector dish was cracked from the strain, and Archimedes' core programming had been pushed so close to its operational limits that the AI had to enter a 3-day diagnostic cycle, leaving the ship feeling strangely empty and silent. A scar had been left on the healer. Weeks later, the Aurora Court ratified the new amendment. It was called the Doctrine of Intent. It made dependency by design an interstellar crime. Any technology offered as aid now had to be fully sustainable by the recipient. Its maintenance protocols open source and transparent. The loophole had been closed. The law had been made stronger, patched with the hard-won knowledge from Cygna 4. The Cathar's methods were not just defeated, they were made illegal forever. Rostova stood on the observation deck, watching the star-dusted swirl of the galaxy. The fight was endless. There would always be another predator, another scheme, another victim who needed a champion. But they had done more than save 2 worlds. They had changed the rules of the game. They had proven that the law was not just a set of suggestions, but a living weapon that could be wielded in the name of justice. It was a slow, exhausting, and often thankless war, but it was a war she was born to fight. Victory was not an end state. It was the simple daily act of holding the line. She felt the faint vibration as the ship's main drive was repaired and brought back online. The cool, calm voice of Archimedes returned to the ship's internal comms. Diagnostic complete. All systems nominal. Commander, I have cross-referenced the Cathar's known technological bases with the new doctrine of intent. My projections indicate that 92% of their economic model is now legally untenable. The AI paused. You have bankrupted an empire without firing a shot. Rostova allowed herself a final weary thought. She hadn't bankrupted them. She had simply presented them with the bill. It was a bill that had been long overdue. The public ledger entry for the new law blinked its text, scrolling across the Galactic data network, a permanent, indelible scar on the Cathar's legacy. I did not come to punish you. I came to teach you. And the first lesson is that all debts are paid, all ledgers are balanced, and all mirrors eventually show the truth of the face before them. You built your empire on the illusion of grace, but a civilization that does not understand the difference between a gift and a leash has no right to rule. The universe does not need another master. It needs a better memory. We are that memory. We are the ledger. And the accounting has just begun. The law is not a shield, it is a mirror.